Hey, what's up guys? BJ Dell back with a new Monday Let's Draw video. Today's video, the premise comes from the Facebook group. If you haven't joined yet, the link is in the description below. Keep creating a Learn, Draw, Share art community. Hop on over and join us. But today's idea comes from Bill. Bill's been featured in some of the previous Wednesday art critique videos. And Bill asked, hey, can you show how to do a design without the heavy inking outlines? Just, a straight design, no outlines. So that's what today's video is all about. I actually plan on showing you two different ways today, but as I looked at the time code as this was going on, I was pushing a half hour just on the first type. So I didn't want to make this really long. So I'm going to put that in my back pocket, use it for later, and show you that second way that I use. But as far as this video goes, honestly, this is a really complicated way of doing stuff. It takes a little bit of time and extra effort. So keep that in mind. Like I said, this video is about a half an hour. If I was doing this work for myself or a client, it would usually be hour and a half, 2 hours, maybe 3 hours that I would take. So keep that in mind too as you watch this. It's kind of rough. Saw some stuff, especially at the end, where there's some random lines that pop up, from pinching and zooming. You get those weird lines that aren't supposed to be there. So I actually took an extra 15-20 minutes after I stopped recording and kind of fixed the stuff that I didn't like. So if you want to see the final version, I've got that over in the art group too on Facebook. So make sure you check that out. But until then, just keep watching this and we'll see what I come up with. Alright guys, so let's go ahead and jump into today's video. Like I said, I'm going to show you today how to do a design completely without inking, without doing the heavy outlines. So to do this today, I think we're going to do a flamingo, so something pretty basic I can show you here. Let's do the head just as a kind of oval, do a couple of feathers back here. The head's going to swing down here and wrap around. The neck, it's got that crazy neck. Want the beak to come down and out and kind of be exaggerated. We have this down here. There we go, and let's see. The eyes kind of just a more upset or just not really all that thrilled with what's going on. Look, I mean, this is one of the ones that Alice and the Queen used for the croquet game. Something like that. Okay, yeah, I like the look of that. Do a cheek here coming down. Alright, so now that we've got the sketch, usually in my previous videos how I do stuff, you'll know I'll do the sketch layer, and then I'll drop the opacity of that, do a hard inking layer on top of that. But this is going to be different, so we're going to drop the opacity of this one down by going up to our layers, to our wand, and going to opacity and using the slider. But instead of adding a new layer, which we're going to do, instead of adding that on top, we're actually going to go underneath because we're going to add in these color flats, and I want them under the sketch layer so I can actually still see that sketch layer. If we put them on top, we're not going to be able to see anything. Usually with a line layer, you can do that because you're just doing lines, but we're going to do large shapes of color here. So we still want to see our sketch. So first thing I'm going to do is do the shape of the head, and you'll see here that this is a lot different than what we usually do. Don't really have to worry if you get this perfect the first time, because we are just getting this basic shape. That's all we need. We can clean everything up here shortly. The one thing you will notice though is we are going to use a ton of layers. So I am using the iPad Pro 12.9 inch. If you have one of the regular Generation 6 iPads, this might be a little bit harder for you to do, and you might have to drop down the resolution of your canvas. I'm using a 4500 by 5400 canvas. On the Pro, you can use 18 layers. On the 6th gen regular iPad, if you're doing the same canvas size, you're only going to get 4 layers, and we're going to use, I don't know how many yet, but it's going to be close to maxing out. So you might have to, like I said, drop this down if you're using the 6th gen one. Let's go ahead and fill this in. I don't know why it's doing that. There's something not, oh yeah, these aren't connected. All right, I think those are connected. Yep, there we go. All right, so we've got the body done, body and the head. Let's go ahead and add a new layer, and we're going to do these feathers up here. Now, the thing to keep in mind with using this method for coloring, for highlighting, for shadowing, is you're going to have a ton of different layers, and you need to know ahead of time where the light source is coming in from. So on here, the light source, I'm going to have coming in from this direction down this way. And then you also need to know where on the design, where are the different elements in regards to each other, as far as higher, lower, in front, behind. So these feathers that we've got here, those are actually going to be behind this head. So we need to make those layers underneath the head layer. And then each one of these feathers is actually going to be on a separate layer. So this feather here is the top feather. This next feather is going to be under that top feather. So we'll fill that in. And this is important for when we go in and do the highlights and shadows. And you'll see why. And then we're going to make a new layer, drop that one below this one, and this is going to be the third feather. All right, so all our feathers are done. So let's go ahead and do the beak. I'm actually going to go back here to this head and pull this part down a little bit. There we go. Okay, so the next part is the beak, and that's going to be a new layer as well. We're actually going to make that on top of the head layer. Let's go to a nice bright yellow. All right, got that. Fill that in. And then the last part is the darker part of the beak. And that part's going to be on top of that yellow layer. Let's not go too dark. Let's go like a kind of darkish gray, I guess. And let's go ahead and do that one. Get really close to that edge over here, but that's okay. I think, well, we still got a little space. All right, last thing I want to do is the eyes, and those are going to be on top of the head. So let's go ahead and go back to the head, do a new layer, and let's just go to white. And let's just knock out these eyes real quick. Once again, just getting the basic shape and the basic placement of these. We're going to clean everything up here in a second, so don't worry about getting everything perfect. It is not important right now. All right, we got those, so let's go ahead and turn off our sketch layer now, and you'll see what we're left with is we've got this basic shape outline of our colors and where everything is set. Let's go ahead and clean up these eyes first. So I'm going to go to the eraser and just do a straight line across here so that these line up. And let's kind of clean this circle up. Nice and round. I think that one looks actually pretty good. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the eyebrows and the pupils now. So let's go ahead and this will be really the only, I guess, line that we're doing per se. We're going to have some lines come in as far as the shadows go, but not actual inking lines. There we go. All right. And then what I'm going to do is I will take this, I'm going to set this to alpha lock. And you'll see what happens here by doing that. When I draw these pupils in, they're not going to go outside of that circle. And we're going to be using alpha lock quite a bit more here shortly. That's how we're going to color this entire picture, and well, as far as the shadows and the highlights go. So you'll see that coming up. All right, looks good. So now we can go ahead and start adding some depth, some dimension to the picture by adding the shadows and highlights. All right, so what we want to do is let's go ahead and start with these feathers back here. So let's start with this bottom one first. What we're going to do is we are going to duplicate this layer. And then we're going to go ahead and that top duplicated layer, we're going to set that to alpha lock. Switch our color to black. And then we are going to do some shadows. Well, this is basically just like we would normally do shadows. We're going to drop the opacity down. And let's get it to a nice even number here. Let's get it to 35%. And the reason that you want to see what your opacity is at is because you're doing these on each individual layer. Usually with the previous tutorials that I showed, the opacity is the same. You're doing one shadow layer. With these, since every layer is going to have a different shadow, you want the shadows to be the same numerical value so they look the same. They've got the same darkness to them. So same thing here. Let's go ahead and duplicate this layer. And then let's alpha lock that top copy. And then drop down the opacity once again to that 35. There we go. You'll see what's happening is, since these layers are behind the layers here, it's knocking them out, and you're not going over top of these, which makes it really nice. Usually with the previous way of doing things, you know, if you overlapped, you would have to erase, and you don't have to do that with this method. So see here, it's not even going into this head part. It's just keeping it right there because that head is a different layer. So that makes it fantastic. And even though this takes longer to do, there are definitely some pros that outweigh the cons. So duplicated this layer of the top feather in the back, and we're going to alpha lock that one. The same thing here. Let's pull that shadow up there and drop the opacity back down to that 35%. And I think I'm going to do a little bit of a little shadow back here on this one. There we go. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and go over to the head now. Same thing here. Let's slide to the left and duplicate, and then set that top one to alpha lock. Let's go ahead and add some shadows in here with the eyes. Do a couple of lines here. So we're not actually doing outlines. I still want kind of heavier, thicker shadow over the top and the bottom here. There we go. Let's go ahead and drop this opacity back down to 35 as well, so that everything has that nice uniform color across it. There we go. I'm going to pull this line out a little bit further. There we go. Looks good. Do the same thing here. And I think now that I've got the shadow and I want these to be a little bit darker, you can see that these kind of get lost down here. So let's go ahead and go a little bit darker on those. Go back up here and just drag and drop these in. And same thing with the eyes as well. There we go. It looks a little bit better. All right. I think that shadow still might be a little bit too dark, but for the sake of time, we're just going to let it roll. Oh, switch this back to black. Same thing here with that line coming across there. Shadow coming up for the beak comes up. This is just a fairly quick tutorial. If I was using this for a client piece or for something that I was doing for myself, I would honestly take quite a bit longer getting everything perfected. But like I said before, I usually like to keep these videos fairly short and don't want you guys getting too bored or burn out watching them. So, you know, I try to do the half hour or less. I think this one's going to be a little bit longer because I want to show you two different ways of doing this. So I'm going to kind of speed through some of this here. Just going back in and just adding these shadows here and there where I think they should go. I'm going to go ahead, since the light source is coming in here, I want to put a shadow coming down this back way here. And I'm going to streamline that to make it a little bit easier. So just follow the natural curve of that line that's already there. Go. This cheek, I want to do this cheek as well. One thing to remember though, as you're doing this, is to make sure, since we've got these layers set to alpha lock, it's only going to let you color in on parts that have color on that layer. So if you mess up a stroke, make sure you're using your undo button. If you need to knock out a stroke, instead of using the eraser, you need to reselect the color that you're on and erase that way. Because if you use the eraser to clean up that stroke, it's actually going to erase that color from that layer. And then if you go back in to do other stuff, it's not going to let you color on that because that line's not going to be there anymore. That color is not going to be there anymore, and it doesn't have anything to reference. So it's going to give you large portions that are empty. And then you're going to wonder what the heck happened, and that's what happened. All right, so let's pull this one down into the cheek here. Come on. There we go. Oops. Go back to black. There we go. All right, looks pretty good. And let's go ahead and go to this yellow now. Same thing here. I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to go up to this top layer and start doing the shadows. Well, this is one of the important parts here since we don't have lines. Whoops. I forgot to alpha lock it. Let's see what happens when you don't alpha lock. It doesn't keep it in that color or that layer. But one of the important things here is, since I did not, use lines, this part of the beak here that would usually have lines showing that they, go in and connect, that's not there. So you need to show that with the shadows. and the way that those wrap and interact with each other. Looks good. Let's go ahead and drop the opacity of that down. That 35. Just keep everything uniform across the layers. That's good there. I'll actually add some more shadow into this where these connect here. There we go. All right. And let's go to the last one. We've got the beak. Where is the beak? There it is. Duplicate that one, and once again, set it to alpha lock. Drop the opacity down. Close enough. All right, there we go. Now, we've got all the shadows done. Let's go ahead and go into the highlights. Now, here's where things are a little bit different too than our regular way of doing stuff. We're not actually going to do separate highlight layers. We're just going to do these right there on those shadow layers that we already did. So that kind of saves you a little bit of time. We're going to do this yellow one first. And then you can also add, you know, some extra ones around too. I'm just hitting the edges right now, but if you want to add some smaller ones in, you can do that as well. And the same thing too with the shadows. If you wanted to add some smaller ones of those in too, you could do that. Let's go ahead and go up to, actually let's do the dark part of the beak now. There we go. And let's do the head now. Get these highlights across here that are going to kind of give that brow some shape. You're going to see that coming in now. That was just kind of a big blob before. Now it's got some definition to it. As you can see, you don't necessarily need the heavy outlines to do this. You can create the same look with highlights and shadows. So this just gives you a, as you can see too, I just used the eraser there and this part wasn't working, so this is where it's important not to go too light on the highlights, because if you do, it's going to knock out this entire thing here. You don't have the luxury of having the dark line there, so you got to make sure your highlights are at least dark enough that they're not going to blend in if you have, you know, a white background. If you don't have a white background, it's not a problem, but always got to keep that in mind. Once again, this is a very cel-shaded way of doing things. Like I said, I was going to show you two different ways to do this today. Just looking at the time code already, I think I'm going to save the second way for next week. I don't think it's worth trying to cram all this into one video and making it, you know, an hour-long video. I think some people are going to kind of get bored, so let's save that one for next week. But there is another way of doing this. And that's the thing too with you know, any way that you're, you know, coloring, shadowing, lining, not lining. There's so many different ways to achieve the same effect or achieve something similar. So, if you rather use, blending modes on the layers menu to do that, you can do it that way. There's so many different ways to go about it. So I don't want you to think that this is like the be all end all way to achieve this look. There's definitely a lot of different ways that you can get the same look. So keep that in mind too, especially if you've watched other videos and somebody's taught you something different. It's not, there's not a right way or wrong way to really do this. All right, we got that laid in. Let's go ahead too on the eyes. Let's lay some shadows in there to make them pop a little bit. This one I might drop the, oops, I forgot to duplicate an alpha lock. You'll see that's why that's important there. I guess it was alpha lock, but it wasn't duplicated, so yeah, you can't drop. That's why we're duplicating all these. You can't drop the opacity since we're drawing directly on that layer. If you drop the opacity, it's going to drop the opacity of everything. So like here on the eyes, it would drop the opacity of the white. If you're doing the body, it's going to drop the opacity of the pink as well. So that's the whole reason why we do the duplicate layer on there. All right, there we go. I think I'm going to add a little bit of black here. Just make it pop a little bit. I don't want to use outlines, but I want it to be a little bit more defined from one layer to the next on those eyes. I think just adding that little bit in there is going to make that pop a little bit more. All right, there we go. And let's add a little bit more on this neck part here. Oops, go back to black here. And just give this a little bit more character coming down here. Kind of like the, it's just like the tired, sagging look of it all. So it looks like he's been through some stuff, so. Let's do a couple more this way too. Oop. Go back to the yellow. You can see I'm going back and forth. I'm really used to just, kicking back and forth between layers, but can't really do that like that here. All right, and I think I'm going to add a little bit more shadow in on the neck because the way this beak comes down, that's probably going to give off a pretty good shadow too. Do that. I'm just going to cover up all that stuff that I just did, but I think it's going to look better this way. There we go. That's a little bit darker than I would usually go, and I really think there needs to be more in this back part. But like I said, I'm just doing this fairly quick, so this isn't the most perfect design ever. Would probably change up quite a bit and add in maybe some, yeah, we can still do that. Add in some like feather swooshes over here just to break it up a little bit. So it's really dark on this side, and I would probably change that in a final composition. Just don't like it that dark. Like I said, this is quite a bit of shadow here. I'll swing this down and around too. I know I was just complaining about too much shadow and I'm adding more, but hey, what are you gonna do? All right, I think that's pretty good. Let's add a Couple more highlights into this white section here, or the pink section here. All right. Like I said, I think it's got pretty good character. I like the look of them, so got an attitude for sure. Thicken up these lines coming around. So there's not really going to be too much highlights down here. I'm still not totally happy with the neck here. I'm going to pull that out a little bit, I think. Not make it so pronounced as far as the shadow of the beak goes. Yeah, I think that's a little bit better. It flows a little bit nicer. All right, so one last thing. Oh, let's do a highlight up here on this feather. I thought I was done. Not so much. This to pull down a little bit different. The way that meets up. Now let's go ahead and do a highlight on this top part. That should be good. My battery's almost dead on my iPad, so good timing. Yeah, we definitely won't be able to do the second part to this. So, okay. So that's today's Flamingo design using a technique that does not use any lines, does not use any inking at all. Just shows you how to use basic color flats on separate layers and use the alpha lock and duplicate menus to give you the finished product. All right, guys, that's it for today's video. As always, thank you for watching. Really appreciate it. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're getting so close to 1,000 subscribers, and I'm super excited. I'm actually going to do a giveaway once we hit 1,000 subscribers. I will kind of tell you more details about that shortly. I'm thinking it's probably going to be in this next week, so stay tuned for that. But if you liked today's video, make sure you give me a thumbs up and hit that bell for notifications so you can get alerts when I post new videos. But like I said at the beginning, join the Facebook group. Link is in the description below. We'll see what you guys come up with. Really want to check it out, so make sure to join. But as for me, I can be found online, bjdell.com, and Instagram and Twitter at bjdell. So until next time, keep creating.